This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec from Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bloomberg Businessweek Weekend Podcast. Well, lots of big news this week. The conflict in the Middle East entered a dangerous new phase. J.D. Vance and Tim Walz squared off in what is likely the final debate of the 2024 campaign. Dock workers along the U.S. East and Gulf coasts went on strike for the first time since 1977, as the union took a hardline stance against automation found at other ports around the world.
All topped off with the September jobs report on Friday that followed comments earlier in the week by Fed Chair Jay Powell about a solid labor market, but noting that conditions have, quote, clearly cooled over the past year. Check out the latest on everything from the economy to the presidential campaign to geopolitics on the Bloomberg Terminal or at Bloomberg.com.
This hour, we tackle geopolitics and the U.S. political divide thanks to two new books. One gets into the psychological roots of tribalism and how the things that keep us apart can actually bring us closer together. The other book, timely considering the escalating tensions in the Middle East, takes us back to 1929 and ghosts of a holy war.
Plus, this week we got our own read on the consumer when we caught up with Josh Weinstein, the CEO of Carnival. All of that to come. We begin with the escalating conflict in the Middle East. This coming week marks the one-year anniversary of Hamas's attack on Israel.
Much has happened, including this past week, Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel. As we recorded this, the world was awaiting a possible Israeli response against Iran. One conversation we had on the conflict took us back to 1929 and came courtesy of Yardena Schwartz, an award-winning journalist and Emmy-nominated producer. Her new book, Ghosts of a Holy War, the 1929 massacre in Palestine that ignited the Arab-Israeli conflict.
The events we're seeing today, in which there is already this broader war against Israel by Iran and its proxies in the region, really shows us that this is not a conflict about land as it has been treated for decades. This is a holy war, as I argue in my book, and it needs to be looked at as such. And we see that very clearly now, in which this war is not just between Israelis and Palestinians, it is between Iran and its proxies in Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. For the last year, this didn't just start, as you said, yesterday or last week. It's been going on 1 century ago with a massacre in what was then British Mandate Palestine.
Well, take us back to 1929, because it does feel like we need to understand the history. And I feel like we continue to be kind of on a history lesson. For those of us not either from the region, born in the region, lived in the region, or have some personal impact from it, we're constantly kind of studying to understand the complicated nature. Somebody said very simplistically to me, well, it's kind of like gang wars to some extent because you have so many different groups. How do you see it, and how does going back to 1929 take us back there in terms of what happened?
Yeah, so many people begin their conversations around the origins of this war with years like 1967 or 1948, but this conflict began long before that, actually 2 decades before we see the emerging of the driving forces behind this conflict today. And those forces are religion, as I said before, but also disinformation. And it was a campaign of disinformation that led to this horrific massacre of one of the world's most ancient Jewish communities in Hebron, in what was then British Mandate Palestine in 1929. And my book elucidates in gripping detail the parallels between that massacre 1 century ago and the massacre of October 7th.
Why do you think so many modern conversations about the history of the region, at least the modern history, start in 1948 and don't go back to 1929?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think it comes down to people not really being able to wrap their heads around what is a really complicated and a conflict that has such a long history. And so they try to look at it in the simplest way possible. And it makes sense then to begin that story in 1948. But that's like beginning a story in the middle, because you see the emergence of what has become a very prominent lie that is told around Al-Aqsa Mosque. It is the third holiest site in Islam, and it sits upon the ruins of the ancient Jewish temples in Jerusalem. And that that the Temple Mount is the holiest site in Judaism. And that kind of tells you why religion plays such a big role in this conflict. But the rumor that is still told by Muslim leaders today is that the Jews of what was then Palestine were planning to conquer Al-Aqsa Mosque. That was the lie that led to the massacre of 1929. And that lie continues to be told today by groups like Hamas, the Ayatollah of Iran, Hezbollah. And you can just look at the name that Hamas gave to its operation on October 7th. It was called Al-Aqsa Flood, because this lie about the Jews of Palestine in 1929, or today Israel, this lie that they're trying to conquer Al-Aqsa Mosque to rebuild the ancient Jewish temple, is such a powerful force, a galvanizing force in the region. And corrupt leaders like the leader of Palestinian Muslims under British rule in 1929 have managed to distract criticism of corruption, nepotism, misappropriation of funds. For the last century, they've been able to distract their people from their own failures by holding on to this lie that is so powerful.
Yardena, I know the book focuses on 1929, but I want to go back even earlier than that and sort of understand how the seeds for this were planted, maybe even during the British occupation of the area earlier in the century.
Yeah, so we're talking about British Mandate Palestine. This was a mandate given to the British Empire to rule over what it had just conquered from the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled that territory for more than 400 years. And before the Ottoman Empire conquered the region, it was a province of a rotating cast of foreign powers going back to the Romans, the Greeks, the Crusaders. It was actually the Romans who gave Palestine its name. It had been known as the Kingdom of Israel and the Kingdom of Judea. And when the Jews of Judea carried out a rebellion against the Romans, they punished them by renaming the land after the Israelites' ancient enemies, the Philistines.
Well, and I guess that's what I'm wondering is, you go back to, as we said, the early 1900s and the role of colonialism, the UK specifically, in establishing a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, which was against the wishes of the indigenous Arab population. You do also wonder how that kind of set the stage, in addition to what you were talking about, which led to the Hebron massacre, that there was more going on that made for a very volatile environment between these two populations.
Absolutely. Yeah, the conflict didn't just begin out of nowhere in 1929. Of course, the tensions between Palestine's Jewish minority and its Arab majority had been simmering for years and had already claimed dozens of lives by 1929. But the massacre in Hebron and the riots that engulfed Palestine that week in August of 1929 really became the first mass casualty event of this conflict and kind of set the formula for every eruption of violence that we have seen since.
You lived in Israel for more than a decade, and as we've been speaking with our reporters on the ground there, they've shared with us this feeling that people in Israel right now do feel like that the conflict they are fighting is one that is indeed existential. And I'm wondering if you think, given what's going on there today, the actual existence of Israel in the future is threatened.
Absolutely. Understanding that really helps to explain the actions Israel has taken since October 7th. I mean, there's talk of disproportionality, and we heard this from Biden today. But I think if you are in Israel and you see your country being attacked from 7 fronts, and you see a world that doesn't really understand that the only reason we're not seeing mass casualties yesterday and today as a result of Iran's ballistic missile attack is a result of Israel's defense systems. I mean, you don't just have the Iron Dome intercepting some of those rockets, but you also, or many of those rockets, I should say, but you also have the government investing in bomb shelters for Israelis, something that I wish, other countries would do. Imagine if Gazans had bomb shelters or Lebanese civilians had bomb shelters, it could protect them from the terror groups that are embedding themselves within civilian populations. And Israel really is fighting a war not just against the Palestinians, it's against Hamas, but it's also against Hezbollah. And, like I said earlier, we really should be looking at the names of these organizations because they tell us everything. I mean, Hezbollah's name means the party of God. Hamas's name is the Islamic Resistance Movement in English. So much of what these organizations say themselves we're not hearing in the West. And what they're saying is they desire to destroy the state of Israel. And Israelis hear that. But I think a lot of us here don't understand that.
So in your thinking about the region and the way forward, we fingers crossed that we get to a better place at some point, although it's hard to see right now. Does a two-state solution in some ways help the situation specifically in Israel and with the Palestinians?
So I do believe that a two-state solution is the only solution to this conflict. And just going back to the history here, I began writing this book nearly 6 years ago. I didn't just pick up and start writing this after October 7th. I was writing about this massacre well before October 7th. The reason I did was because there was this family in Memphis, Tennessee that I was introduced to that had found this box of letters in their attic containing hundreds of pages of letters from their late uncle who was murdered in the massacre in 1929. And his letters painted this beautiful portrait of peaceful coexistence in Hebron that preceded the massacre. And what really captured me in reading these letters was that I had never known, and many people didn't know or don't know, that Hebron was once a beacon of coexistence in Palestine. And today, if you're familiar with Hebron, it is the antithesis of peaceful coexistence. And I think understanding how that happened really can tell us how we can find a way out and work towards peace. Because really, if you look at the last century, a two-state solution has been on the table since at least 1937.
Right. And
Palestinian leaders have rejected every single two-state solution since then. I mean, Palestine could have been independent and free for the first time in history in 1947 had Palestinian leaders and Arab leaders accepted that solution, and instead they declared war on the unborn Jewish state.
And in the meantime, many innocent lives have been lost and continue to do so. Yardena, thank you so much. Appreciate getting some time with you. Yardena Schwartz, journalist and author. New book is Ghosts of a Holy War, the 1929 massacre in Palestine that ignited the Arab-Israeli conflict. So we appreciate getting some time with her.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Okay, Carol, I was out in Colorado. I was biking last month with my dad. I went all over the state. I saw in some situations neighbors dueling with each other when it came to political signs. Across the street, next door, neighbors literally calling each other out depending on where I was. A few times. It was kind of funny out there. But it reminded me of the deep divide that we see in the American political landscape. Not that I need to be reminded of it because out there in the media, it's there each and every day.
Right.
It's not just our imaginations, though. A report from the Pew Research Center this summer said, quote, Republicans and Democrats are more divided along ideological lines, and partisan antipathy is deeper and more extensive than at any point in the last 2 decades.
Well, we feel it, right? We talk about it constantly, this division that we're seeing, whether it's across party lines or elsewhere.
Oftentimes, folks out there use division and the word tribes to sort of describe division. It's often looked at in a pejorative way, just another thing that kind of pushes us apart and it makes us separate from one another. Yet Michael Morris argues in a new book that perhaps rather paradoxically, what keeps us apart can actually bring us closer together.
Kind of love that idea.
Michael Morris is professor of leadership at Columbia Business School. His new book is out, Tribal: How the Cultural Instincts That Divide Us Can Help Bring Us Together. He joins us from New York.
Michael, so great to have you here with us. So relevant in terms of here we are in an election year. So talk to us a little bit about, first of all, just kind of general concept of what divides us can bring us together. Why did you think you needed to write this book and bring it to people?
Well, thank you for having me. This is a book that I've been working on for almost 10 years. I'm a behavioral scientist, a research psychologist, and my specialty is cultural psychology, which is the study of the cultural frames in our heads that guide our thinking, guide our actions and decisions, and what activates them and how they change. And I've been teaching at top business schools for decades, at Columbia Business School, formerly at Stanford Business School. So I've developed a toolkit for thinking about how to use the cultural forces that shape people's thinking to create unity in a group or to create change in a society or in an organization. And that's the reason that I started writing this book, sort of to create a playbook for activists, leaders, managers, high school teachers, coaches, anybody who has to orchestrate a group into, a productive direction.
Well, and what's interesting is you hear the word tribe or tribalism, and you might get a little, I don't know, be maybe put off a little bit, or think one way. But you say, when we think of tribes, it's countries, it's churches, it's political parties, it's companies, it could be families, right? Like it's, groups that we deal with all the time.
Yeah, tribes, from an evolutionary standpoint or from a, classic anthropology standpoint, it just refers to the distinctively human form of social organization, which is large communities that are united by shared culture, as opposed to being united by blood relations or being united by, dyadic bonds between people. And that's how we differ from other primates. You could never have a chimpanzee Manhattan. Once they get more than 50 individuals in a group, it starts to break apart because they depend on either being related or having a direct personal bond of trust. We can trust total strangers because we share culture with them, so we can understand them and we can predict their movements and we can predict what they will do, so we can trust them. So yeah, tribalism is mostly a good thing. It's what made us human. It's what got us where we are. Now, I think what's really interesting is, over the past 10 years, while I've been writing this book, there's been kind of a trope of toxic tribalism that has emerged among the pundit class and has been picked up by politicians and business leaders. And the idea is that somehow a deeply evolved drive to hate each other has somehow reawakened. And now we're screwed because we don't talk to each other anymore, and there's no way to get the genie back into the bottle anymore. And this makes for colorful articles, and maybe it makes for riveting speeches, but it's a kind of despairing, fatalistic take on the conflicts of our time. I don't think it's a helpful way to think, and I don't think it's an accurate way to think. It's not a way of talking about tribal instincts that any evolutionary scholar or any behavioral scientist would recognize. So I think we've kind of talked ourselves into this take on tribalism that's not scientifically founded and not helpful.
Well, Professor Morris, would you dispute the idea that we're more divided now, like the Pew Research says, than we are, at least politically, and than we have been in previous decades for the last 20 years? Does that seem not necessarily accurate to you?
Perhaps in the last 20 years, but certainly not the claim that I hear more often, which is that the American people have never been this divided. If you read history, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln became president. He had less than 40% of the popular vote. 7 states seceded before he was even inaugurated. The Civil War breaks out a few weeks afterwards. 4 more states secede. Now that's a crisis.
That's divided.
That's a legitimacy crisis for a president, and that's a big rift to heal. But Lincoln was one of the leaders, and there are many throughout history, political and business leaders, who they had faith that the best way to heal a divide was tribal memory. It was appealing to our common ancestors, appealing to our common past. Lincoln had that famous mysterious line in his first inauguration that the mystic chords of memory shall yet swell the chorus of the Union. What was he talking about? Well, he thought of himself as storyteller in chief, and he made all of these wonderful speeches like the Gettysburg Address that made reference to the sacrifices of our common ancestors and the common ideals that even people in the South were moved by that speech. one holiday we have coming up is Thanksgiving, and we often associate Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims, but it was really Abraham Lincoln who started Thanksgiving as a national holiday, and he did it because he thought that we needed a national ritual of gratitude and memory, and that more than anything else could bring people together. So, we may think of nostalgia and sentimentality about the past as a silly, irrational way of thinking, but it's a deep part of our tribal wiring, and one that can be used for inclusiveness, not just for divisiveness. We see a brand of populist politics nowadays where the story is, things used to be great, but now we have all these immigrants and things are going to hell. Well, that's a divisive form of populism, but there have been many leaders who practiced inclusive forms of populism. And I think we need to understand tribalism and understand all the ways that we can use it at a time like this.
This is fascinating. I guess I want to ask you about what's going on in our culture where so many younger white men are pretty angry and feel left behind. What's happened?
Well, they used to have a not automatic, but a relatively easy path to success and social standing because they were from the favored group, the group that was sort of the prototype of who should have positions of power and responsibility and affluence. And that is declining. It's certainly not over, but it's diminishing. And so they feel like people are cutting ahead in line. People are taking the places that should be theirs. And, it's not completely new. I mean, there's been resentments about affirmative action for decades. But I think now it's not just affirmative action. It's that we've had waves of very talented immigrants coming into the country, for the past 20 years. And that means that a lot of our, native-born white male good old boys are not getting those promotions. It's Russians and, Brazilians and, Nigerians who are getting those promotions, and not necessarily because of any DEI policies, just because we have so many talented people from all around the world who've arrived.
Have you seen anecdotally that show up in your business school classes in the decades that you've been teaching? Have they become more diverse?
Very much so. The MBA population has changed dramatically. Wow. I had a class last spring, a class of 50 people, and I had 7 Nigerian students. Some of them Nigerian Americans, but they were all, students who were Nigerian, by identity. And that's, Nigeria is one of the most populous countries in the world, so we shouldn't be surprised. But it wasn't the case when you were in the business school classroom. We weren't recruiting from Africa, right, and the African diaspora in the same way. It's good for the world that we are.
Your advice to folks where we see so much division, but you say in your book it can bring us together. What are tools we can do? Piece of advice.
Well, what we need to do is understand what tribal psychology really is. And there are 3 parts to it, what I call the peer instinct, the hero instinct, and the ancestor instinct. The idea that we're driven to kind of imitate our peer group, we're driven to emulate our heroes, and we're driven to perpetuate the ways of our ancestors and maintain traditions. And all of those things can be positive forces for unity. And what we need to do is understand the levers for invoking these forces. They're inside every person, but there are triggers that bring them to the fore that are invisible to us because they operate unconsciously. And so I've tried to, explain what we've learned from lots of research about what those triggers are that a teacher or a manager or a politician can use. And then over the longer term,
right,
cultures are malleable, and we have to understand what are the signals that we can send to help evolve the culture. Culture is not a fixed thing that we're stuck with. It's something that we can mold.
That's a great way to wrap it up. Michael Morris, thank you so much, of Columbia Business School. His new book out today, Tribal: How the Cultural Instincts That Divide Us Can Help Bring Us Together. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Businessweek.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Cruise line giant Carnival dropped earnings this past week with a profit beat, and yet the stock fell initially after the company announced adjusted EBITDA for the fourth quarter that was slightly below consensus and a weaker outlook for net yields in the current quarter, so investors were a little concerned initially.
And yet, several analysts raised their price targets on the stock. For the latest on Carnival's business, we caught up with the Carnival president and CEO, who's also the chief climate officer, Josh Weinstein. He joined us just after Fed Chair Jay Powell's speech Monday at the National Association of Business Economics.
I don't usually follow the Fed chairman, so this is a big thrill. Tell him to go check out Jack White. Yeah, Jack White in Nashville. Well, we'll talk about the third quarter first, and as I've been able to say for the last several quarters, it's record. We just hit a record for revenues, for revenue yields, for operating income, customer deposits, bookings 2 years out. So right up and down our business, it's records and strong demand. So we ended the third quarter up about 8.7% in our yields year over year, which was strong. And at the same time, we held our costs flat, which was also good to note, and that resulted in, like I said, a record quarter. And as we were able to adjust our full year guidance, we did that for the third time this year, and it's going to take us up to about $6 billion of EBITDA, which again, to use a broken record word, it's a record. And so we're expecting much more as we get into the fourth quarter and then beyond.
In terms of macro, what matters in terms of Fed policy for you and what's going on in terms of the interest rate environment? He did also talk about the savings rate, suggesting consumers can continue spending, which we want to get into too, in terms of, it seems like consumers are certainly still spending on cruises. But give us macro, give us consumer spending, how you would describe it all.
Well, for us, the word's going to be robust. We've been living through this cycle with everybody else. We've lived through the high inflation, we lived in the high interest rate environment, and now we see inflation down. We see the Fed taking action to start reducing that interest rate environment. And through all of it, what we've been seeing is robust demand. And because of our business, first of all, it's a global business, as you know. We have a portfolio of brands that are really world-class all over the world. And what we see is strong demand, no matter how you slice it, whether it's geographic, whether it's contemporary versus more premium. We're seeing that strength, and we see it in the results. We see it in the onboard spending levels. As part of our third quarter results, it's not just about the ticket revenue, which was taken anywhere from 6 months to up to 2 years in advance, but what's the actual onboard spending environment, which is much more real time. And the fact is, our onboard spending for this past quarter was up over 6% year over year. And that's actually an acceleration, because in the second quarter, it was up closer to 4% year over year. So what we're seeing is consumers that are healthy, that still want to spend on experiences. And as you've probably heard me say before, we are an unparalleled value, right? We are a better value to land. I remember being in the offices with you in December talking about my hotel stay. Not only are we unparalleled in the value, we are unparalleled in the experience that we give to people. You get value for what you pay for, and we deliver on that guest experience like nobody else.
So Josh, are you seeing any weakness across any part of the portfolio of brands right now from any segment of the consumer?
No, we're really not.
No pullback really whatsoever?
Not. No, as a matter of fact, if you look at our 2025 booked position, it's higher in price and occupancy than it's ever been at the same point in time. When you look at 2025, we're higher in every single quarter on price and occupancy. So things are moving continuing to move in the right direction. And I think cruise is tiny. Right, at the end of the day, we are the biggest cruise company in the world, but if you take the whole cruise industry, it's only about 2% of the overall vacation market. So we are a very tiny segment in a huge market with a lot of room to grow, because we're getting the word out. We are being more effective in communicating the value and communicating the experience and really differentiating our brands so that they get a cut through, and it means something to people, and that's paying dividends.
Talk to us about the cost side of the equation. As you just said, and I read too, that nearly half of 2025 bookings are done at record ticket prices. The cost equation. You guys are a floating city once you're out on the water. Food, meals, labor. Tell us what you're seeing in terms of the cost side of the equation, Josh.
Yeah, so it's good news there too. We are seeing that deceleration, of inflation, and we were actually just today able to take our cost guidance for the full year down from up 4.5% on a unit basis to up 3.5% on a unit basis. So we're making good progress there. We are seeing the benefit of a lot of hundreds and hundreds of activities that we're doing across our brands, taking little bits of efficiency, better sourcing savings when we can, and it adds up given our scale. So all things are starting to move in the right direction on the cost side, which is very different, obviously, than what we've been experiencing along with everybody else as we went through that inflationary cycle.
Speaking of the inflationary cycle, I'm wondering about the pricing power from your perspective. If you're going to be able to continue to raise prices, in your view, next year and year after year.
That's certainly the goal. At the beginning of this year, when we were talking about our guidance for the first time, there were a lot of folks that were saying, oh, yeah, but when you get to the fourth quarter of 2024, you took your pricing up in 2023 up 10.5%. That was our results last fourth quarter. You're not going to be able to top that. And we just came out with guidance today for the fourth quarter, where our yields are going to be up 5%, the majority of which is more price. So we feel very good about what we're doing and our ability to manage the booking curve, increase our demand profile, and ultimately deliver on board as we always do.
What keeps you up at night? Barring another global pandemic, no. But seriously, you've been rosy for a while, and I'm just curious. It does sound like some really strong metrics. And I said, reading some of the analyst commentary, they feel the same way. But I'm just curious, what's the difficult part of what you guys do? I mean, you're ordering new ships, you're adding to that. Tell us, Josh, where is it that you get a little concerned? Is it the election outcome? I'm just curious.
No, I think those types of things are temporal. And truthfully, after living through what we lived through in 2020 and 2021 and getting back from literally a pause to where we are today, there's really not much that keeps me up at night, truthfully, that's within our control. At the end of the day, in a 2-year period, we went from negative EBITDA to up over $6 billion in EBITDA. So I don't see much within our control that we can't push forward, and that's showing. Just in this year alone, we came out with guidance in December for the first time, and we said our yields will be up about 8.5%. Now we're saying up close to 10.5%. We said costs would be up 4.5%. Now they're going to be up 3.5%. We said our return on invested capital will be up 9%, and now we're saying no, it's 10.5%, which is a 5-point improvement year over year. So I think we're making real good decisions. We've got an amazing team all over the world with all of our world-class brands really driving the business forward. And, I just think we're just starting to scratch that potential. We are really focused on just doing the basics better and better. And it's working.
Hey, Josh, you're also Chief Climate Officer at Carnival Corporation. You mentioned things that were in your control. One thing that's not in your control is the weather, is the climate, the connection between weather and climate. The two are not the same, but the two are certainly linked. Many Americans, millions of Americans, are still cleaning up after Helene. In multiple states, it's killed more than 100 people. Many are still missing at this point. How do you think about climate change in your role? How do you think about planning for an uncertain future?
Well, first of all, our heart and our sympathy goes out to all those impacted by Helene. It is a tragedy unfolding, and we have a lot of connections to a lot of those local communities. So that's first and foremost. As far as the bigger picture goes, we understand that the world is evolving rapidly. We need to do our part, and we need to plan for the future. When it comes to doing our part, we are steadfast in our drive to reduce our own carbon footprint and do what we can to make the world a better place. We are 35% bigger today than we were in 2011. And this year we will emit 10% less absolute greenhouse gas emissions than we did in 2011, even though we are 35% bigger today. That's because we understand the importance of doing what we can to drive that sustainability agenda. And as far as preparing for the future, that goes into all of our decision making. You know, when we're talking about the ships that we're building, when we're talking about the destinations that we develop, how can we develop them in a way that they can deal with whatever that environmental landscape is, not 5 years from now, but 20 years from now and 30 years from now, and keep leaning into technology, keep doing our part to figure out how we can reduce our consumption every single year. That's the goal.
And I'm assuming that's incorporated into when you guys build out, whether it was Grand Turk or I'm thinking about Celebration Key, right? That opens up in summer of 2025. Just the revenue and cost impact of that debut. Tell us a little bit about the dynamics around that one.
Yeah, it is going to be pretty special. 2025, we open up in July of 2025, and then we obviously go through a ramp up phase as we learn and we figure out what works, what doesn't work, and how we tweak. And it really is going to bear fruit in a significant way in 2026 when we have 19 Carnival Cruise Line ships that are going to be reaching Celebration Key from, I think, about 10 different home ports in the United States. So not only is that going to be a boost to our ticket revenue, it's going to be a boost to the spending in the destination. And then to the point we were just talking about, the proximity to the United States is phenomenal from a fuel spend and carbon emission standpoint, because it's so close, we can go slower and shorter distances to get there. So we are very much looking forward to its introduction.
All right, great stuff as always. You're a gem for being so patient. So appreciate it, Josh. Look forward to next time. Josh Weinstein, he's the President, CEO, and Chief Climate Officer of Carnival Corporation, joining us from Carnival's headquarters in Miami.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Plenty ahead in our second hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week, including the actor and comedian who is now an investor bringing South Asian culture into the mainstream, one smooth, spicy chai at a time.
Plus, why the best air fresheners for your car are also the most expensive. Spoiler alert, it's not those little trees that you see in the Ubers and the Lyfts and the yellow cabs. Yeah. Also later on the Dracula Watch, Tom Brady's $11 million auction and AI Judy Garland reading you The Wizard of Oz. That's all in Pursuits.
First up this hour, we're not talking metaverse and high tech, not talking geopolitics or the state of the world. Rather, something simpler and closer to our hearts. Mac and cheese.
And building a dream from it. That's what Erin Wade did, leaving her job as a corporate lawyer to start a mac and cheese restaurant, write a cookbook and manual on how to start and run a business. She came up with a blueprint for a really serious problem in her industry.
Yeah, she's done a lot of stuff. Erin is author of the book, The Mac and Cheese Millionaire, Building a Better Business by Thinking Outside the Box. She joined me alongside Bloomberg Daybreak Europe co-anchor Stephen Carroll, who was recently in for Tim.
I began my career with a huge passion for food and had, cooked in restaurants, but found that it was a really dead-end job. The pay is low, the treatment is not great, so I just did not see a future for myself. So I decided to go to law school and do what, generations of lost people with no direction have done and become a lawyer. But I didn't love it. So I actually got fired. Turns out you're not good at what you don't like doing. And I decided I wanted to create the restaurant that I wish that I could have worked at. So not just was it a love of my family recipe of mac and cheese and wanting to bring that to the market, because I just didn't see that being filled anywhere. There was like pizza restaurants, barbecue, but not mac and cheese. But I really wanted to focus on how do I create the kind of workplace that I wish, the kind of restaurant that I could have worked in, and what do I need to do that?
So what in particular did you want in terms of making it the place that you wanted to work at? What was it that needed to be different?
My book is filled with a lot of trial and error. I think the truth is I didn't know. I knew what I didn't want to do, right? But sometimes it's harder when you haven't had the example set of what you do want to do. So I found that it really came down to three things, which was, communication, collaboration, and collective success. And I'm happy to give you examples of, ways that we did all those three things. But that I found was really the secret to our success. And, not only in an industry where The average tenure is, less than 90 days. Our average tenure is 2.5 years, but our profitability was in the top 1% of restaurants. So I'm really, proud of what we achieved.
Yeah, because look, it's a difficult business to get into, and I think if you're going to make a leap of faith into something new, you didn't perhaps pick the clearest or the easiest path to do that. Talk us about getting the first homeroom started.
I think that's why actually it makes for such a great business book, because, if we were using these techniques successfully, I mean, it is the hardest industry to make it. So, I really think these ideas can work anywhere. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, banks won't even give you loans because it's considered, your odds are better in Las Vegas than investing in a restaurant. But I do think that with sort of, by using these techniques, I think people in all kinds of businesses can beat the odds.
Talk us through the first few months of that business, though. At what point did you know that you were onto something and that was going to take off into something that of course it became a hit?
Luckily, we were packed from, day one, and I really credit it to, frankly, just having an exceptionally good quality product. So, at most restaurants, if they have mac and cheese at all, it is a side dish. It's something that is not paid very much attention to. And for us, this is really the main thing. So, we made each one to order. We used my family recipe. We put nearly a quarter pound of cheese in each portion. So, it's incredibly cheesy. It's fresh. It's made with love and care. And that makes a huge difference versus sitting in a vat somewhere. So I think people were very, very obsessed with the product from day one. But frankly, I think also what we did is created tremendous value surrounding the experience, because I had worked a lot in fine dining, but something that I thought was really lacking in a more casual setting is great design and great service. Those things don't need to cost more. They just need someone to care more. And so, I think that people's perception of value of getting to sit in this really beautifully designed space, getting, some of the best service that they've had in a restaurant while eating, the best version of mac and cheese they've ever had. It's just a winning combo.
I have to say, there's a restaurant in our neighborhood, a local one, family run, and they have an incredible mac and cheese, and we will go there just for the mac and cheese. And there used to be a place downtown, I don't even know if it exists, but that's all it did. And great, cast iron skillets and any kind of varieties of mac and cheese. It is just that food that we just love. What's one of the biggest, what was one of the biggest moments in this process? I feel like everybody who started a business, especially in the restaurant industry, we've all seen the bear and loved it. But I do wonder where you were, it was either just a huge learning experience, whether from your team, from your workers. I don't know. Tell us.
I have to say, we used a lot of really interesting techniques to engage people in the business. For instance, we're an open book company, and so share our financials and teach financial literacy. And I think that was a huge aha, right? It really unlocks people's potential and power to understand business in a deep way and to feel like they're part of something that's bigger than themselves versus just showing up every day to cook. So, I'd say that's one moment that I'm incredibly proud of. But another is that we used all these techniques of, we had a lot of different tools to be communicating, collaborating, and we actually came up with a solution to sexual harassment, which our staff was experiencing. And I wrote a viral piece in the Washington Post about it. It got adopted by the EEOC. I went to Washington to go testify about it. And it's now used by restaurants and bars all around the world. So, I think that also, frankly, when you tap into the power of a workforce, we were just a small restaurant, but made a difference on a global scale. And I'm incredibly proud of that.
But talk to us a little bit more about that, how you came to realize that something needed to be done differently.
Well, I was approached by a number of female servers at the restaurant who all were complaining. And honestly, they said they'd worked at a ton of places, and this had happened everywhere. This was just the first time that they thought maybe someone would actually do something about it. And so I did what I usually do when someone brings up a problem, which is include them in the solution to it. So, we came up with a system that our entire staff that wanted to participate did participate in creating it. And I think the reason it's so effective is that, honestly, it really sort of honors people wherever they are. It's basically a color-coded system. And when someone experiences something with that color, they just report the color and an action is taken. So, For instance, a yellow is just you get a bad vibe at a table. You just say, hey, I've got a yellow at table 2, and a manager will take it over for you. And an orange is you have a bad feeling, plus, let's say, an ambiguous comment, something like, I like your shirt. Depending on who says that to you and how they say it to you, it might feel totally benign or aggressive. And so same deal. Someone just goes to a manager and says, hey, I've got an orange at table 2, and the manager takes it over. And with a red, that's someone saying something overtly sexual or touching a staff member. And in that case, again, the staff member just says the color, and then the manager is required to kick the person out. And, I think what's so cool about the system is that, guests honestly don't know it's being used on them. So it's very customer friendly. Staff members are going to have all kinds of different experiences, and some people are going to find certain things threatening and other ones won't. And so it allows us to meet staff where they are and take action. And it's really easy for managers to use. And what we found is amazing is we thought it would just be a way of coping with harassment and just giving us a way to deal with it. But actually what it did is it really nearly eliminated the worst forms of it, because very few people walk into a restaurant and stick their hand up someone's shirt. But, they will usually start with lower level things like checking them out or making low level comments. And then once things are tolerated, they escalate their behavior. So it just really sort of stopped the problem from happening, and in a way that I think is really respectful to people,
right.
No matter if they're customer, staff, manager.
I think what I find really interesting about this color code of conduct is you're giving people language to be able to talk about how they feel and how they feel affected by it. And it's a model that's been taken up by businesses elsewhere as well. Talk to us a little bit about how you're seeing, what you've heard about how the color code of conduct's being used outside of your business.
Yeah, I've gotten just fabulous feedback. And actually, one of the most fun parts is there's plenty of people that use it that I'll never know, but I'll walk into a bar and I'll find one of our posters on the wall. Or
wow.
I went to speak at a conference, and it was all these, bar owners from across America and the globe. And I was so surprised because at the end of my session, I didn't, I wasn't getting a ton of questions. And I was like, what is happening here? And then I asked people to raise their hand if they had known of the system or if they use it in their bar. And everyone raised their hand. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So
I wonder, does it help?
I think people...
This is an industry where there's a huge staff turnover, right? And I wonder how much that's helped towards staff retention at a time, we talk so much about the tight labor markets, and we know that hospitality is one sector really affected by that. Has it helped you to keep good people on your staff?
Oh my God, 100%. To my point about sort of all the tools in the book, right? If we can use them, then anyone can, because I think, something really missing from the conversation right now about the labor market and what to do is that in my experience, the most meaningful things actually don't cost money. They just take time and care, right? We are constrained. There's only so much we can pay people when we're charging folks $10 for mac and cheese, right? that's just true. It's not going to be the most highly paid job of someone's life, probably. But, there's so much you can do that makes work an enjoyable place to come to and meaningful and purposeful. And I think those are the things, honestly, that, make life worth living.
One of the things that I really liked about your book and your own story as well is you're talking about wanting to fall in love with work. And do you think that we need to be in love with what we do in order to succeed?
In my experience, yes. I'm really smart, and I was working as a lawyer and I got fired, and I don't think it's an accident. I found it very hard to be good at something that I didn't like doing, versus something I'm passionate about. My worst days as an entrepreneur have been better than my best days as a lawyer. But, I think it's a real gift, to wake up and enjoy going to work. And it's one I didn't, previous to starting my own restaurant, think was possible. So I guess I just wanted to communicate to people that I do think it's possible. And I try to give them tips and tools for, how to find that passion within yourself, how to pursue it, how to create spaces where other people can too. Because I think, honestly, we spend more of our lives at work than in almost anything else. And if we don't enjoy it, what are we doing here?
I would certainly say yes. It's one of the pieces of advice my dad gave to me growing up, find something you love to do. And I remember my first job in journalism, I had to be in it the wee hours, made maybe $14,000, $15,000, had to borrow money from my father and mother to buy a used car for $4,000 so I could get into New York City because there was no mass transportation. But I knew it's what I wanted to do. And it's amazing, right when you find something you want to do. Having said that, you also write To create anything new of value, you always have to be willing to fail upward, to make mistakes and get a little better every time. This philosophy had worked for you, for me, you, with everything from adding new menu items to refining management philosophies, but something about experimenting with people's safety at work felt too important to fail upward. That's important.
Yeah, I mean, most of the book is sort of ridiculous stories about, what are the ways that we failed before we found systems that worked. And I was pretty terrified of doing that with our harassment system. But the truth is there is no other way to create something that doesn't yet exist. So we did, and I tried to put in our mistakes so that other people don't need to make them too.
I really enjoyed how honest you were about this, because when you have a non-linear career path and you've been moving out of things, it can be difficult to be honest about the stuff that doesn't work. When you've invested, for example, a lot of money in going to law school, that's got to hurt, right? And I wonder, do you take things from your legal career into what you're doing now? Are there elements of what you learned in law school and maybe what you learned from working in the industry as well that are relevant to your job now?
Actually, one of the most helpful things that I took from my legal career into being an entrepreneur was actually how we deal with discipline. I had been really interested in this question because I feel like it's pretty ineffective in most workplaces. And I had worked all through law school at a district attorney's office, actually at Kamala Harris's office when she was DA of San Francisco. But so I was very interested in what are different ways that we approach punishment. And we ended up at my restaurant homeroom adopting a system that I had seen used in the criminal justice system called restorative justice. So, most stuff at work, when someone screws up, you just get punished. You maybe get a write-up, you maybe get docked shifts, things like that. And with restorative justice, the idea is actually it's not to punish people, but to make it right. And so we started shifting from punishing people when they screwed up to, walking them through this restorative model of figuring out how to make it right with staff, how to, apologize, do nice things, fix it with the customer, help your manager, really make it right with all the people affected by their behavior. And It was a real sea change for us. It was really helpful.
Erin, you dropped something like an elephant in the living room. We have to ask you. So you worked with Kamala Harris, or it sounds like you have some experience. What do you think our audience, in your experience with working with her, or dealing with her, or talking with her, that you think is worth sharing?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I do think, she was, I had worked for her because I was really drawn to, she was doing stuff that at the time was considered pretty out there. And, so yeah, I have tremendous respect for her, and, fun that she's running for president right now. So I guess I'd just say, I think, I really respect that she has tried things that other people weren't willing to do, frankly, at the time. I don't think she gets much credit for that, but she's an innovative prosecutor, and she's good at what she did.
Well, be sure to keep us up to date on what you're doing with Homeroom, especially if you expand it out and grow. And we love talking to certainly small business owners, but your path has really been an interesting one. And thanks for sharing it. Erin Wade, chef and entrepreneur, I guess I can say also lawyer, or former lawyer. Her book is The Mac and Cheese Millionaire, Building a Better Business by Thinking Outside the Box, joining us from Oakland, California.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
When it comes to foreign policy, the United States has sought to cultivate a deeper partnership with India as a bulwark against a more assertive China, while India has sought greater U.S. investment and deeper cooperation in technology sharing and defense.
It makes sense considering there are about 4.8 million Indian Americans in the U.S. That's according to data from the U.S. Census Bureau. Indian Americans account for 20% of the nation's Asian American population overall, and about 2/3 of Indian Americans are immigrants, while 34% are U.S. born. Also, around half of Indian Americans live in just 4 states: California, Texas, New Jersey, and New York.
Well, reaching out to this community one smooth cup of chai at a time, are actor and comedian Hasan Minhaj, along with Anyi Sanyal, who co-founded Kolkata Chai, along with his brother, Ayan. Bloomberg's Matt Miller joining me in this conversation as well.
Yeah, so 5 years ago, my brother and I decided to do the craziest thing possible, which is bring authentic chai to America. We grew up being able to travel back to India a lot, and New York City, you can find anything you want to eat and drink, but it was really hard to find a good cup of chai. So that's where we started. We opened 6 months before the pandemic. We bootstrapped our first cafe location, which I don't recommend. But 5 years later, we are at 3 locations. We just brought on, one of the more generational talents in this country to join the business, and we're super excited.
Hassan, how did you get involved in it?
So funny enough, I had heard about the cafe for a long time. Getting a great cup of chai is kind of somewhat of a secret in our community. You talk about where you can get a great cup. I had heard about the cafe over in Nolita, and then funny enough, my wife put me onto it. I get back home, I open one of our drawers, and it's filled with KCC.
Seriously?
Yeah, and she goes, "Have you had Kolkata Chai?" And I go, "Yeah, I've heard about it. Is it the real deal?" And it became Bina approved, and therefore it became Hassan approved. And then I went down to the location, their location. They're celebrating their 5-year anniversary this week. But I went down to the Nolita location, and I saw the community that they've built. They now have 3 cafes, and of course they obviously have the incredible D2C business, and they've built this amazing omni-channel platform. Ani got to chatting, and a lot of times, celebrities, we get asked to participate, and hey, you should endorse this product.
Right.
And what they'll do is they'll use your name and likeness, and they'll white label you with some commodity, tequila, sneakers, T-shirts, and that's great. I've done that.
Or you
before.
drink it on the Patriot Act.
Sure.
Or
yeah.
show.
Or you talk about the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 3 by Verizon 5G, the fastest 5G network available, right? I've done that commercial.
But this is different.
This is different. This is something where I genuinely loved the brand. I loved what they had been building, and I wanted to authentically tell our story through tea. Tea is one of the largest markets that's growing right now, and getting a great cup of chai has been something that in our community we've always wanted, and they really cracked the code, not only just from their brick and mortar business, but the fact that they broke the code with the masala chai concentrate.
Right.
So when I was having that great cup of tea at their location in Nolita, I was like, wait, this same cup can be here in New York City. I can have it in the Midwest. You can have it wherever across the country, which was like that was the aha moment for me.
My good friend Kriti Gupta used to make me chai and bring it into work, and then unfortunately she was transferred to London. So now, I'm in the market. Yeah. What is the secret to making it really truly authentic?
Yeah, what's the Coca-Cola recipe?
I wish I could. No, the secret is my brother. He's the head chef, and he's figured out the perfect blend of tea, spice, and a little bit of sugar to get that sweet and spicy balance. We source all of our tea from legacy tea estates in Assam in India. So this is where 100 years ago they planted tea, 200 years ago they started planting tea, and so all of our product is coming from that region. So we're talking about the most authentic, unfiltered product that you can find.
What Paris is for fashion, I would say Assam is for tea. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Ani, how big is the market? I have a daughter who loves it, was in Tanzania, brought it back, loved it. So tell me how big the market is, and tell us a little bit about the business.
Yeah, so in the U.S., the packaged tea market is about a $15 billion category.
Right.
But it's growing slowly because tea is a little bit sleepy. However, you have these modern formats like matcha, which is actually growing at a 10% CAGR. And so we see ourselves as that next iteration of matcha. You mentioned, the growing Asian American population in this country, and that is fueling this need for people to want to have the real thing. We don't want to go to, the takeout spots or the fast food spots. We want that real, authentic, from the source product. And so that's really where we're excited about chai as a new category. And our business, so we've grown 300% year over year. So we are on a rocket ship right now. Top line revenue. And that's accelerated by our direct-to-consumer business and our e-commerce products. So we do...
Is that where most of the business is, and that's where the...
That is where most of the revenue is, yep. So we use our brick-and-mortar locations as community building and product introduction to the market, since chai is relatively new. And then we accelerate that growth on direct-to-consumer. And so we have a best-in-class chai mix, which is like a tea and spice mix. And we do a liquid concentrate product, which Hassan alluded to as well. Yeah. And you can make chai in 30 seconds at home, so we're going to get you right. But
what you guys were talking about was exactly the problem that they solved. Hey, I had a colleague that put me onto this great cup of chai. My daughter came back and gave me this great cup of chai. And the difficulty has always been is how do you package and product this great experience that you had somewhere in Tanzania or somewhere in Delhi or in Mumbai or in Assam, and how do you get it to the break room?
Yeah,
that's what they crack.
You don't want to go to Starbucks and get the chai tea latte.
I'm not here to throw shade on any other places, but what KCC has also done, which is historical, is they're the first storefront location for a chai cafe. So this thing that is
different.
Yeah, that has a deep resonance in our culture. it was usually relegated to like a side item that you would get at a restaurant, but this is like a true brick and mortar storefront and an omni-channel business.
What do you do to grow it? So what's the plans? Is it more stores? Is it more
I guess
omni-channel?
You bringing him on to grow it, right?
Or do you also like?
What's the new movie? It ends with us.
It ends with us.
Drink a cup of tea and it ends with us.
Yeah. Number one movie at the box office.
There we go.
But also like bringing it into other big retail.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. I think right now our growth is happening on direct-to-consumer and e-commerce, so that's really where we're dialing in. New product formats, new ways of advertising and telling that story. I think having Hassan, generational storyteller, bringing chai to mainstream America through that type of format, through that pop culture format, that's what we're really excited about. And then to your point about retail expansion, being in grocery stores, that's the next step for us. We want to be accessible to all Americans.
For me personally, it was about a healthier caffeine alternative to coffee.
Is there no caffeine?
There's caffeine, but there's not to get too scientific, but there's L-theanine in it, which is almost like a cleaner, kind of healthier sort of kick that you get from chai. So and also for people where if coffee's giving you a little bit of a rumble in the tumble, it's messing with your tummy a little bit, chai is a great alternative to that. And so for me, I think people really want the real thing, and they want a healthier alternative to coffee or espresso.
And did you give some to Blake Lively? I mean, you passing it on to people who aren't Indian? You want
to me, chai fundamentally is about community, family, commiseration. It's like intrinsically linked to joy and being together. And so, like, to me, the X factor to me was, why isn't this having its yerba mate or matcha moment? And I think it really is about to have that.
All right, this was almost perfect. It would have been perfect if you had brought us a cup, but...
Did you want a cup? We could have plugged it?
I'm just saying. Hassan Minhaj and Anis Anyal, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Kolkata Chai Company. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
All right, she is definitely one of my all-time favorite people here, no doubt about it. I know, Matt, you think it's you, but it's really Hannah Elliott. She's Bloomberg Pursuit's auto columnist, who's also Matt's co-host on the Hot Pursuit podcast, and we got a lot to talk about. Where do you want to start? Go, because I don't know.
Where do you want to start? We had a great time yesterday. We recorded our podcast yesterday. We put it out tomorrow, and we talked about a number of things, from a car show that I went to over the weekend, a big land yacht that I was driving, the Infiniti QX80, and also air fresheners.
I really want to get to that, but go do cars first.
Let's talk first about the giant SUV that I was driving, which I really like, the Infiniti QX80. It's all new, the 2025 model year, and Hannah's going to get it next week. What do you think about these giant three-row SUVs, Hannah?
How big is too big?
I was going to say, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I can ask you plenty of questions about it, Matt. My question is, and this is going off of our conversation that we had on our podcast, you mentioned that you thought it looked great, and then you kind of compared the interior to a Chevy.
No.
And I know that this SUV costs about $100,000.
Oh.
So my question to you is it worth it? Would you spend, if you had $100,000 to spend on a big SUV, would you buy this one?
You're throwing some shade.
So, man. No, I mean, it's a good point. What I meant was that the infotainment system is a Google-based system.
Okay.
So that's the platform that they use. And Chevy also had that in my Silverado. But I would compare this more to Chevy's Cadillac brand and their Escalade. So this is an Escalade Range Rover competitor. If I was looking at one of those cars in the same price, I might consider this as an alternative. The problem is that you can get a Range Rover with a V8. You can get an Escalade with a V8. You cannot get the QX80 with a V8. It only comes with a twin-turbo V6. And it's the same problem that Ford and Lincoln have. They just don't put out big V8s in their giant trucks anymore. And in something that weighs like 8,000 pounds, you really need V8 power for me to enjoy it.
I have to say, I don't know if it's a problem for them, Matt, because they're saving emissions. They're probably getting a little bit better fuel efficiency.
And frankly, I don't know if, the moms buying these family haulers, do they care that it's a V8? Because if I were a mom, I don't think I would.
Are the seats comfy? Can I put the kids in the back and
Well, this thing
pack them in for soccer?
Not only do I think it looks beautiful, but the interior is very comfortable, and the leather is super nice, and the color, the design is.
What's the mileage on that puppy?
It's 16 city, 19 highway, so it is 1 mile per gallon better than the V8 that they had last year, which doesn't matter to you, but I guess if they sell, 100,000 of them, then it does
Here's
matter.
another question for you, Matt. How did you feel pulling into sort of a posh event in the Hamptons in an Infiniti? Did you feel like you were sort of on par with the Ferraris and Lamborghinis, or no?
No, obviously not on par with the Ferraris and Lamborghinis. There were a ton of them at the Bridge, which is the car show I went to. Everybody
Did you have a disguise
else was
on?
getting there in like a Rolls Royce or a Maserati. But, other people were driving in the Defenders and the Broncos. And yes, in the big Escalades and Range Rovers, I did feel okay. It looks the part. So it didn't bother me. It also smelled pretty good.
Nice segue.
Thank you.
Well done. Can we talk about these air fresheners? Because I do care about, I have something that I spray in my car like every time I go in. It's like some organic something.
Also, Carol smells delicious right now, I will tell you.
I believe it.
It's actually a brand that you write about.
It's Diptyque, which I'd never heard of before I read your story, Hannah. So your point on air fresheners is the cheap ones are the worst, right? But the expensive ones are...
Wait, the hanging tree is not good?
You know what? Newsflash, the hanging tree is not good. And anything you buy in your gas station is probably not going to be good. And there's a specific and very real reason for that, which is those are made with the least expensive materials and with the least expensive chemicals. Ooh. And what we found, we here at Pursuits tested 10 different air fresheners for the car. And we did find there's a direct correlation between price and quality. And the more you pay, you're going to tend to get a better, less nauseating air freshener. But the bigger thing that I found with this story, which to me was really interesting because we all have very specific ideas about what kind of smell we want in our car. I think everybody wants the new car smell, of course. And then once that wears off, it's like you don't want curry or fish or like smells that are great to eat but not necessarily to drive with. The idea is this is a really big open space that automakers and large fragrance brands haven't really attacked in the past, but they're starting to.
It's very smart.
And yes, they're smart. So there are 10, including some offerings from Diptyque, some offerings from Frederic Malle, some offerings from Acqua di Parma. There are these known fragrance companies that are starting to develop air fresheners for your car, but also they could double. Yeah. A lot of them could double as great, like things to put in your closet, your linen closet, drawers, handbags, that sort of thing.
I love it. One called Sex Wax, but we're going to leave it on that note.
Mr. Zoggs.
Don't touch it. Don't touch it, Matthew Miller.
No. And that came, so many people recommended it to me.
And it's bad.
We got to run. Hannah Elliott, you're the best. Matt Miller, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
Tune into our podcast, Hot Pursuit.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
The goat selling watches, a watch in a coffin, and dead celebrities working again thanks to AI. I guess there's a theme there.
Okay. I'll wait. All from our Bloomberg Pursuits team. A new issue out featuring some of the latest and greatest. Here to talk about all of it all is the editor of Bloomberg Pursuits, Chris Rouser, along with Bloomberg Pursuits columnist who heads up our arts and culture coverage, James Tarmy, both joining us in the studio. Chris, I got to tell you, I don't think Carol actually believes Tom Brady's the GOAT. And
okay.
And I also have like a little,
There's more than one GOAT is my point. Serena Williams is a GOAT.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't,
were we operating under the presumption that there was only one GOAT?
Carol's
across all fields?
Let's just say Carol doesn't sound like a huge Tom Brady fan.
Get ready for a lot of hate mail.
He's fine. All right, moving on. What's he up to, Chris?
Well, Tom Brady is selling a lot of his memorabilia. That is game-worn jerseys, helmets, and...
Wait, do they smell like Tom?
If you're lucky, people will pay extra.
We just went down a weird street, but go ahead.
And of a special interest to me, he's also selling a bunch of very expensive watches.
He's got quite a collection.
This Nadal watch is pretty cool.
Yeah, so he has a baby Nadal, which is a watch that
cute.
Was made in partnership with Rafael Nadal and Richard Mille. And they're not to everyone's taste, but the Richard Mille watches people call them the billionaire's handshake. And this one's estimated to sell between 300 and 500,000.
Can you also
little colorful kind of watch.
The one that I really thought is kind of in your face is the one that's like Tom Brady, like on the dial.
Well, it literally says Tom Brady in diamonds. And then there's a 7 also on the dial to symbolize his 7 Super Bowl victories. And that's yours for a mere $400,000 to $800,000.
So understated.
I think it'll go for more. I mean, it's a custom-made royal oak from Audemars Piguet. There are like internal chats on the Bloomberg terminal where people talk about watches, and they exploded about this because everybody thinks it's really horrible, and everybody wants to own it.
Wow!
He wore it during his roast, his famous
the Netflix roast.
The Netflix roast,
that's pretty funny, actually.
But it's not clear to me whether he commissioned it or someone gave it to him or the company gave it to him.
I'm actually surprised Carol wasn't up there roasting him.
Stop it!
My understanding is that
need
he
security
commissioned
now.
He commissioned it.
He commissioned it?
Ooh.
Yes.
What does that say? Hey, what's the market though for these kinds of watches right now?
So the watch market at auction and across memorabilia generally, everything is softening. And just secondhand watches in general, which were so hot during the pandemic. Sotheby's, who's auctioning off this stuff, says that the single owner sales, like celebrity owned sales, are still doing well for them. And Sylvester Stallone sold some really crazy watches for many millions of dollars earlier this year. So this is these are such special cases that it's really hard to put them in the context of the broader collectibles market because people love Tom Brady so much. And I honestly think these estimates, which are $300,000 to $500,000, I think they're low.
They're also coming straight from him. It's not like somebody else owned them and they're putting the collection up for sale.
Yeah. Why is he getting rid of this stuff?
Well, I asked that question, and first of all, they didn't give me a straight answer. Secondly, there is some speculation out there that he is kind of thoughtfully timing the market, that this is, you are actually seeing an uptick, as Chris says, in demand for these single owner memorabilia sales, but you're also seeing a continued softening of the memorabilia market. So if he's able to time this right, let's put it this way. This is not the only watches that he has.
Yeah.
And also these are not the only jerseys and helmets that he has. So I think if he's able to, again, this is pure speculation, but kind of time the market in a nice way and clean up to the tune of 11 or more $1 million.
Yeah.
It's a little Marie Kondo, right? Like he's just cleaning stuff.
It's just the time, I think. It's like, that's why I think Sly Stallone also sold his watches.
All right, let's talk about a watch with a coffin.
Oh, yes. So this, in Businessweek, in this last issue, we featured a company which I've always thought is very interesting. It's called Chrono Swiss, and it's an independent Swiss watchmaking brand. And it was started in 1983 during the quartz crisis, which is when battery-powered watches began killing off all mechanical watches because they were seen as more accurate and just more efficient and much more inexpensive. And this guy who was working for Heuer, which is a big company, was going to get laid off, and the company couldn't afford to pay him in his last paycheck. And so he said, you know what, just give me a bunch of those old mechanical movements, which are the little, the engine of a watch, because you don't want them anymore. They're basically worthless. You're going to switch to quartz. And so they paid his last paycheck in these movements, and he went off and started this company in his garage in Munich with his wife in 1983 called Chrono Swiss. And it was basically focused on keeping mechanical watches alive. Now, mechanical watches, all these years later, are very big.
Right.
And they're very brightly colored. They're really cool. They use all these old watchmaking techniques like guilloche, which are these like hand-carved metal dials, but like bright colors,
They're pretty
really
cool.
high-tech new like chemical vapor deposition to get really great color and metallic finishings. And so they make these wild watches, and they had a Dracula watch that came out this year, which I thought was so funny. It's 18 karat gold. It's Grand Faux enamel, and if you order it, it arrives in a coffin.
Like an actual coffin?
No, it's a watch-sized coffin.
Okay, just making sure. Just want to make sure. Before we get to some real estate, there's another watch story that I want to hit. Social media, kind of all over social media in recent weeks, was the former president and current Republican nominee, Donald Trump, selling $100,000 watches.
Which makes me wonder if Tom Brady might buy one, because aren't they buds?
No comment.
Okay.
What's up with these watches?
So Donald Trump is actually a watch collector. He has some nice watches. Vacheron Constantin, I think he has a Rolex, Patek Philippe's, and he whenever he sells stuff that's kind of like feels like something he would wear or do, his fans buy it. So he started with an independent company. He basically licensed his name, and they're making a couple of lower price watch lines for like $500, $700, and then some higher price watches for $100,000, which are solid gold. You can get them in rose or yellow gold, and they have a tourbillon complication, which is it's a thing that helps the accuracy of timekeeping. It's an expensive complication to make on a watch. I went through and did some comps, and it's not it's overpriced probably for what it is, but I really think people will buy them. They're only making like 147, reference to him being going to be the 47th president.
Why do 147?
Yeah.
Doesn't he sign them?
He signs them on the back. Yep, and they all come with a personalized message. And I heard from some of our readers that people will definitely be buying them.
Okay. All right. How about from watches to a $30 million house, a beachfront in the Oil Nut Bay development on Virgin Gorda, James, because we're talking about
a beach shack.
At one point, it kind of was. Yeah. She Mrs. Mack was not so happy with the home when they bought it. Give us the story.
So this house is currently owned by John Mack, the former chief executive officer of Morgan Stanley, and his wife, Christy. And they spent a really, really, really long time renovating this house. And they spent a huge amount of money. They told me that they spent $18 million renovating the house after they bought it. And it was a spec house. Yeah. So the house is...
Was it a gut? Did they build? What did they do?
Gut? No. They kept the total footprint. They kept the roof, and they kept the walls, exterior walls, more or less. And they just did the inside and really got it. And they moved windows, they moved doors.
And while they were doing that, a hurricane came through and ripped everything apart, and they had to do it again.
They said to me they had to do reconstruction of the reconstruction. But, it has a lot going for it. It's on the beach. It is right near this very, very exclusive Oil Nut Bay Developments club. So you have the amenities of it. You can just go to the gym. You can play tennis. But it is now on sale, and you can buy it, or I can't buy it, but one can buy it for $29.5 million.
Do they make any money on this puppy?
Well, honestly, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because it's going to have cost them basically $28 to $29 million all in, and they're selling it for $29.5 million. So I think they're really just trying to get their money out of it.
This was not a good flip, I'm just going to say.
I don't get the impression that it actually was a flip. I think.
No, I know. I'm being.
I think they're really trying to kind of Marie Kondo their own lives from a super rich level, and getting rid of one of what they told me was several vacation homes.
But it does seem like there was some nice flexibility with the home. Like they wanted it for sort of every purpose under the sun you could imagine a home here being used for.
Completely. And it can easily accommodate 12 guests, more than that. But also, it's actually not such a sprawling house that you're going to feel like you're alone in a castle if you've just you and a friend or you and a spouse.
Everything custom to in it, which is pretty
So
amazing.
Chris said he heard from folks who are going to buy the Trump watch. Have you heard from readers who are planning to buy this?
Interestingly, I have not. And sometimes when we do publish these listings, we either we find out immediately that someone has read it.
We sell houses.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It is kind of, and we find out immediately that these things have sold off of articles that we've.
Because James talks to the brokers for the story, and then they'll call and they'll be like, "Yeah, that $10 million house in Montauk, someone read the story about it."
There's a side revenue stream.
We do
here.
not get a cut. Just FYI.
No, we don't.
Well, you know who's going to be starting to get cuts? Are dead celebrities, thanks to AI.
Oh yeah.
What's going on?
This is big. So. Basically, when a celebrity has two ways of making money, it's personal services, which is them performing, them doing concerts, readings, writing books, and then there's their intellectual property, basically.
Right.
And so when a celebrity dies, their personal services income goes away because they can no longer produce work. But their intellectual property continues to exist, and celebrities have estates. For example, Michael Jackson was $500 million in debt when he died. Now his estate has made over $2 billion. That's
amazing.
Through this Broadway show, through other posthumous albums, and generally, that's not usual. Generally, a celebrity's net value decreases about 10% per year after they die. Now with AI, they can create new work. And so they're not creating new work, but computers are creating new work. So there's this company called 11 Labs, which has a reader app, which is an example of how you can do this. And basically, Judy Garland, Laurence Olivier, Burt Reynolds, all their estates have signed with this app, and they'll read books for you.
Right.
James Dean can read you The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and you can put in your own stuff. So literally, Judy Garland could read your tax returns.
That's pretty cool.
If they can do this for dead celebrities, they can do this for people who are alive right now. And this has huge implications.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, deep fake technology is a problem. And, Taylor Swift has been a victim of stuff, like politicians. That's a big issue. And some people who manage dead celebrities' estates say this is not good. Like, we should not be doing that. The guy who represents Jim Morrison's estate, Janis Joplin, he's like, these artists will never make any more work. They're gone.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't what it's for.
Treasure what they did, right? Like,
a lot of other people are going for it.
I mean, can I just say that I recognize the criticisms, but there's pictures of Audrey Hepburn next to a pearl necklace that Tiffany's is selling or whatever. People reuse dead celebrities' likenesses all the time. To me, this doesn't. As long as it's clearly labeled as not like an AI version of it, it doesn't seem that much of a bridge.
Yeah, I think people just worry about the gray areas where it's not clearly labeled. So there's a show called Elvis Evolution, which is premiering in London. It's an in-person show, and they're going to have Elvis through AI performing for the first time in 45 years. And it's just going to be a big test of whether people actually want to go see that or whether they're creeped out by it. ABBA Voyage, which is sort of a hologram version of the same kind of thing, but ABBA, all of those members are alive and they were part of it, is actually quite popular. So maybe this could be a thing.
Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of cool. Hey, listen, before we go, just real quickly, James Tarmy, you have an article about the best movies, books, TV, and exhibitions coming in October. Can you pick just one for us?
I can. This, for context, we did a big culture issue and culture preview. And in one of the many recommendations that I put out, I'm really, really excited for the Louisiana Museum outside of Copenhagen. They in Denmark. They have this huge, extremely unconventional show about the ocean, and it's artworks, it's science, it's history, and it's quite unusual for this day and age, both thematically and also conceptually. And I know a lot of people who are going out of their way to see it, and I'm going to do my best to do the same.
And Lin-Manuel Miranda is coming out with a concept album for what could possibly be his next show. It's called The Warriors. It has all these hip-hop stars, all these Broadway stars. It's going to be amazing.
I saw that. I was curious about that. All right. Cool stuff, guys. Always appreciate all that you guys do.
Two guys who can never, ever be replaced by AI. Bloomberg Pursuits columnist James Tarmy, who oversees
sounds like a threat
arts and culture coverage, and the editor of Bloomberg Pursuits, Chris Rouser, here in our studio.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business App. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.